Right then, Cloud Foundry Foundation Technical Oversight Committee for the 30th of May 2023. Agenda for today then. Any actions from last week? We'll hear from the App Runtime Interfaces Working Group. We'll have some time to talk about the plans for putting the Paketo build packs into CF for VMs, any PRs, any other business. As always, any PRs you want to talk about, I mean, other than the one we're planning to talk about anyway, bung them in the list. I didn't spot any that looked like they needed our attention this week, but maybe I missed something. Right then, actions from last week. Beyhan was going to invite people who want to talk about the build packs PR. I'm going to guess that happened, judging by the number of people today. That brings us on then to Runtime Interfaces Working Group. Greg, floor's yours.
All right. I'm going to keep it a little brief, mostly because a lot of it we're going to discuss in the following section. But I think since the last working group update I gave, probably the biggest thing that we've delivered on was CF Linux FS4 and all the associated build packs and Stack Auditor. So I think everyone in this group is extremely aware of everything that's going on there, and the CF deployment maintainers have definitely taken it and ran with it from delivery of those products. But those are all out. They're at 1.0. Everyone is aware of the breaking change around removing the Ruby and Python runtimes from the stack, but that was kind of our big focus for the last, I don't know, 6 months, however long it's been. Other big thing, which we're going to talk about next, is the Cloud Native Build Pack RFC. So we've been working on prototyping and building out that RFC for quite a while now. I know I've been teasing it for basically as long as I've been in this role. I think another thing that we've now been working on is kind of thinking about, okay, well, what are the extensions of that CNB RFC? So another thread that we've started pulling on some recently is starting to think also about the Paketo stacks. So I don't want to jump the gun too much since we haven't talked about the RFC yet, but I think kind of the next area where if that RFC gets through, then there may be a follow-on RFC thinking about how we want to handle the Paketo stacks in CF deployment. We've also been doing a little bit of early collaboration with the App Runtime Platform Working Group. They're doing some like early exploration on things we can do to better support like multi-AZ CF deployments, and thinking about are there things we can do at the kind of platform layer to make it more optimal in multi-AZ deployments. Again, still pretty early stages, and we're mostly in a supporting role there, but that's another thing that we've been focused on. Also, just as of like last week, we set up a application runtime interfaces AWS account. So continuing the effort to move some of our testing resources over so they're under CFF control. So we had an AWS or VMware AWS account that we were using for some of Cappy's blob store testing. And so we moved that over just literally last week, or rather we got the account last week. We haven't fully moved it over yet, but we're in the process of setting up a open source AWS blob store testing there. And then the final item that I have on my list of things to talk about is I know over the last several months, there's been some difficulties with the Java tools team, just because they don't have a ton of, or they only have 2 approvers right now, and they're both very busy. So there was some backup on getting PRs merged and reviewed there. So they're in the process of ramping up a 3rd approver as we speak. So hopefully that should help open up some additional bandwidth there. definitely like continue to let me know if you're running into issues there getting Java tools PRs reviewed. But I think it's mostly just a matter of there's not a ton of approvers currently, and they're all really busy with maintaining a bunch of different projects. So yeah, sometimes some PRs can fall through the cracks there. Any questions about stuff we've been working on? Otherwise, I'd be happy to transition into the big RFC, so we have time to discuss it.
I just wanted to ask about the Sea of Linux FS4 compatibility stack. Do you know when we can expect a first release?
I don't. Sophie, do you know? I know Rob was working on that, but I'm not sure. Rob is unfortunately on vacation, so couldn't make it to the meeting this week.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do not know. I was out last week, so I have no update on that, but I will find out and I can follow up in the Slack channel, get that information for you.
Okay, that would be fine. Yeah, we see an entry on bosch.io and a GitHub repository, but no release yet. Okay, if you provide the latest information, that would be great.
I think that that Bosch.io entry was just because I think Beyhan made a PR or something to create that repo.
Yes,
I think it's just a scaffold.
It's just yeah, an empty scaffold, yes. But right now we are stuck on an older version of Sea of Linux FS4 with Python and Ruby, and would like to update to the compatibility stack.
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand. I will definitely follow up with you today.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions, folks? No? All right, Greg, if you want to take us into the next portion.
Sure. So I'm happy to talk about the RFC as it's currently written. I guess, actually, I think I'll tempt fate and start with a little bit of a demo. So as part of writing up the proposal or writing up the RFC, the other authors and I collaborated on a little like proof of concept for integrating an existing Paketo build pack into CF deployment. So I will try to show y'all what that looks like in practice, assuming I can locate the correct screen. All right. So here I have one of the Paketo sample apps. So this is just like straight from the Paketo build packs repo. And if I look at my build packs, I've uploaded a shimmed version of the web server CNB. And so then if I take my sample application and I push that, I can use my shimmed web server CNB here, and we'll see it'll start invoking the otherwise unmodified Paketo web servers CNB. And we can see right here in the output, we start seeing what you'd see if you were building with the Paketo build pack on any other platform. So it's gonna churn around in the background for a minute or so, and then hopefully we'll have a running Paketo sample app on a CF deployment environment. So I guess while that goes, I think there's been a bunch of good discussion on the RFC. I don't know, I'm gonna skip summarizing it for now, unless anyone has any desire to go through a summary of the RFC as it's currently written. There's a bunch of interesting discussion in here, but right now, I think there's no like direct requests for modifications. It's possible that we may just need to take some of the current discussion topics and try to distill them down into modifications to the RFC, or it's possible I may have missed some requests for changes to the RFC itself in those discussion threads. So I think where I'm at, it's mostly a question of, okay, for the existing threads that we have, how do we want those to reflect back onto the RFC text itself? And then what are the current remaining open questions before we move into the final comment period for the RFC? And we can see here on the right side, meanwhile, we've completed our build and we're now starting up instances. And it is now running. So if I come over here to this CF deployment environment, you can see I have successfully built one of the Paketo sample apps.
Can you actually see an SBOM when you SSH into the container?
That is a good question. I don't see why not. But I also don't know off the top of my head.
SBOM is generated on the build container, staging container, or
there's two SBOMs, right?
It end up in the droplet.
The build SBOM doesn't end up in the droplet, and then the other SBOM, which I forget the name of it, does end up in the droplet.
Right.
okay.
Look, there's a directory called SBOM here, so you know,
all of them.
You get a second applause for that. There being an SBOM.
yeah, look at that. Look at all that stuff that's in there. I feel confident that we can do some good stuff with the information in there. I mean, yeah, as discussed in the RFC, we'll definitely need to build some tooling on top of that to make it useful, but just having that in the application droplet itself is a good first step to starting to collect that data, so then we can build more user-friendly workflows on top of that.
Yeah.
I mean, that very neatly happens to be the first thread of discussion happening there. Do we maybe want to just quickly run through each of the threads, summarize and see if we feel that there is more discussion to be had there, or there is a concrete action? Would that be a useful use of people's time while we've got everyone together?
Sure, I can certainly try to summarize each of these threads. It's been a few weeks since I've read all of them, so I may not get them 100% accurate, but like you said, I think this first one is SBOMs, and doesn't make sense to store the SBOMs in the droplet or in a separate place. So I think roughly where we ended up is, for right now, putting them in the droplet seems to make sense and has some benefits. And then we can build additional functionality on top of that. I guess, are there any open concerns on this thread here?
I mean, like, ideally you want to have them in like separate blobs so you can actually like query them, but that would require lifecycle changes, right? So that's basically out of scope for now, I would say.
Yeah, and I think there's also a question of like, would that be in addition to keeping them in the droplet themselves? Or would that be instead of? But yeah, I think that is potentially something that we can iterate on even after this first revision, because I don't think we have a good sense right now of exactly what tooling we'd want to build on top of it. So we'd probably want to purpose fit for that tooling?
Yeah, maybe we could resolve this one with adjustment in the RFC to note that SPOM data would come in the droplet for the time being, generated by the build pack.
I believe the Cloud Foundry pattern is you put it first in the TGZ and you have a non-standard TGZ implementation that will only extract it.
This
If
is a
Bosch releases
Bosch
their
reference.
Yeah, right, exactly. But it's like the same idea, right? You want it to be kind of associated with the image, but it's extractable more easily separately.
All right. I'll add a note here to
That's right, Greg. I'm doing it as we go.
okay, cool. So then next thread, I think, is talking about some of the service binding stuff. I guess there is kind of the current, I think it's a different thread because this one's way too short to be the thread. So maybe we'll discuss that when we get there. This is talking about why do build packs care about service bindings? And I think we maybe answered that question here. I don't know if there's any remaining action items for this one. I guess, Eric, this is your thread. Do you have any outstanding thoughts on this?
Maybe we'll just get to it on that other discussion about service bindings and potential impact. But I recall noting that like we pointed out a large potential breaking change about service bindings, but we kind of didn't indicate clearly how much scope we thought there was. So that might even be good context to fold into the document for future reference or to check our expectations against when we get into this work.
All right. So then we have a thread here about talking about stacks. Or I guess starting to talk about build pack detection here. So how would you opt into using the new build pack or the shimmed build packs versus the original build packs?
Yeah, this might have concluded by saying we need to pick the best names we can think of for the V3 build packs if they're eventually going to replace the V2 ones, so that people don't have to change them later as at worst an annoyance.
So do we want to, I don't know, would we want to make that decision as part of the RFC process, or just should we put a line in there that's just saying like the names of the build packs should meet these criteria or something like that?
That's probably good. We can figure it out as we work out the newer versions of the build packs. I don't think we need to be prescriptive here.
The names,
just putting in a recommendation like good names, please.
Yeah, except add some musts and shalls in there.
Yeah, they must have good names.
The new build pack shall have be named goodly.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good. All right, I think this might be the big nope, I lied. This is a different services thread or service bindings thread. This is talking about the structure of Kubernetes service bindings, it looks like. I guess, Eric, this is another of your threads. Do you want to collapse this into
this might end up also getting entangled with what I think is the much longer thread about service bindings below it.
All right, we can jump down there. Yes, this is the big one. This is yeah. So this one is primarily focused around there's a concurrent work on the libcnb side to make the libcnb build packs, which my understanding is currently that's just the Java
yes, that's correct.
Paketo build packs. Yeah, so make those more Cloud Foundry aware instead of or not instead of, but for this initiative, make them Cloud Foundry aware by being able to consume VCAP services in addition to Kubernetes service bindings. So there's a potential discussion. This is in reference to the section in the RFC talking about emulating Kubernetes service bindings in Cloud Foundry. But there's a divergent thread here saying, well, potentially if the build packs themselves are able to understand Cloud Foundry service bindings, then we don't need to emulate the Kubernetes ones. And then
has anyone started to kind of categorize what build packs would support that and which not? Because I think like mainly like we are talking about build packs that need VCAP services at build, like at staging time, which is I don't even think necessarily a good idea anyway. So the APM ones are, I think, one of the candidates, right? And I think they are all libcnb based. I'm not entirely sure. So maybe it's worth actually having a look, like what build packs need VCAP services or need service binding information at stage time.
Yeah,
and
so
maybe it boils down to being those that are libcnb based.
Yeah, we definitely took a look at this. I think the Java build packs also use services a fair bit. I don't.
That might also be more at runtime. I know that like the Java build pack will auto inject the Spring Cloud bindings library, which is then going to do its own inspection of the file system for the Kubernetes service bindings instead of VCAP services.
Yeah, I don't know if we distinguish between build time and runtime when we're looking at that.
Yeah, I did that deep dive right into a bunch of the different ones. I mean, I did it sort of sample based. It wasn't like an exhaustive search, but you're right, Jan. There was a lot of APM, a lot of Dynatrace, a lot of New Relic Agent, a lot of Datadog. They're all looking for either specific environment variables or specific VCAP cloud native bindings types, and they're all injecting an agent at build time, which then doesn't get injected if it's not present at build time and meet the detection criteria. And the detection criteria was definitely different. Either it was using a cloud native binding or it was using a different environment variable name or something. So you would notice if you switched build packs to cloud native, it would you definitely see it.
And for what it's worth, if the Java build pack needs it at runtime, the Java build pack is based on libcnb. So that would again potentially work. I don't know about the others though. Like,
I don't really think that the other, like the non-Java build packs have that many APM integrations, but we should definitely check. I maintain a handful of them. None of the ones that I maintain off the top of my head have anything like that, but we should definitely be more thorough than just going off my word.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think it might have been Dan Makuza who said something around in this thread, but like since we're talking about the Paketo build packs here, we kind of control both sides of the equation here. So if there is some small gap that we're not aware of right now between the build packs and the platform, then we could potentially modify that on the build pack side. So I which I think is all to say, like, it seems like, assuming I'm not missing something here, having the build packs be aware of VCAP services is a viable path for consuming service bindings in the build packs. So, which is not currently reflected by the RFC because I didn't know about it, or we didn't know about it when we were writing the RFC. So I think there is definitely something to reflect back in the RFC here, because right now it's pretty declarative about having to make changes to the Cloud Foundry like runtime environment to add these Kubernetes service bindings. But it seems like we have two viable options here. So we could potentially come up with a definitive answer here, or we could also leave it open in the RFC for evaluation when we're building this thing out. Does anyone have any opinions there on the right course?
I guess I would tend to actually make sure that the RFC states that there is like service binding information and there are build packs that need them, and move the whole thing, like how this will be supported, to an open questions thing that needs, like it needs work, right? In terms of figuring out things, and needs, and probably it's done best along the way, and then augmented with a different RFC, or with, I don't know if RFCs can be changed. One of those options, like probably, like, yeah. If merged and accepted RFCs shouldn't be touched, then it's maybe follow-up RFCs that changes this. And it's foreseen already, right? We can write it down here that there are some open questions that will lead to changes in here.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. I just want to make sure that people are comfortable with that unsolved problem in the RFC itself. But as long as that's not a blocker, I'm happy to soften the language some here and be like, hey, this is a known problem. There's a couple of viable options that we're considering, but they will require more analysis as we're going through the implementation process, and maybe follow up RFCs.
Was there any appetite in that thread, in this thread, for doing like the Kubernetes, or trying to mimic Kubernetes bindings?
I think was there appetite for it?
Because it looked like it was going in the direction of just parsing VCAP services, which makes sense and doesn't require changes on the CF side.
Yeah, I think the potential there is it's some of a question of like build pack platform compatibility, because like right now making the build packs more platform aware means that Cloud Foundry would only be compatible with build packs that care about service bindings, that are able to read Cloud Foundry style service bindings. There may be a hypothetical slice where you have other cloud native build packs that are not using libcnb or don't want to know about VCAP services, like don't want the string VCAP services in their code because it's too platform specific, but operators may want to add them to their Cloud Foundry. Now, that would mean that we would have, because it doesn't seem like there's a bulletproof way to make a mapping from Cloud Foundry service bindings to the Kubernetes service bindings. I think there's an open question as to whether we'd actually be able to map those bindings the way that these hypothetical non-Cloud Foundry aware build packs would be able to consume. But I think that's just a question of, by going down the libcnb route, we're now saying like, okay, well, all of the build packs that want to consume service bindings have to know about Cloud Foundry, have to know about VCAP services. And so we're at least theoretically reducing the pool of compatible build packs there.
My inclination towards not fixing it in the RFC is, by the way, not for any potential other cloud native build packs, where we could always say like it's fair game to prioritize the things that are arranged in the CFF community as we take the work. And there's an easy mitigation, right? That's CF push -- docker. So anyone who wants to use a cloud native build pack that is not supporting that can kind of easily do it. I mean, not directly, it needs to build them outside. My inclination is more that we haven't really analyzed the non-libcnb build packs. I would still guess that it's the easier change to either move them onto libcnb or have Paketo also support these alternative means than that. But that would be my inclination for not fixing it here, to first analyze that if we really have full control over it and can decide to go that route.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's three paths, right? You're either going to have the platform try to create Kubernetes compatible bindings automatically. You're going to have software in the build pack do the remapping. You're going to have the build packs themselves have to do the remapping. And that's the worst part for me. I'm like, oh no, if every CNB has to have the word VCAP services in there, to me, that's a huge sadness. for the future of like getting rid of one pattern and replacing it with another, right? But like, I love this second RFC idea personally. I mean, I think we can say in this RFC that this is a problem that needs solving, but it's a little early for us to like make a decision strongly, right?
Yeah, and again, because we're pretty confident at this point that it's not all build packs. Like we will, for a lot of build packs, be able to get like basically full functionality without having a decision here. So it's not a complete blocker.
For what it's worth, they wouldn't have to reference VCAP services. They would just say, give me a binding, and the library has support for also supporting them that are derived from VCAP services. So it's very down in the path. So I think
I know that's option 2. Option 3 was they all have VCAP services.
They all directly, yeah, okay, understood.
Right, and that would be the case for anything that's not using libcmb today, right? You know, like get the library uplift if you use the library.
And you update the library.
Oh yeah, that too.
All right, cool. Any other thoughts about this giant service binding thread? All right, I guess we have another SBOM item here. I know we had covered SBOMs earlier. It looks like there's a open item here to talk more clearly about SBOMs. Beyhan, any other thoughts on this?
Oh, it's fine. We discussed this.
All right, cool. Looks like we have another thread about services, service bindings. So unless there's any objections, I think I'll move on past this one.
Hey, have we talked about service bindings yet?
Yeah, we've determined we're dropping support for service bindings in all build packs across all platforms. All right, so this one is talking some about whether it makes sense to have a separate life cycle versus a extension of the current build pack life cycle. And then there's some discussion about like, well, currently it's vague in the RFC as to whether this is a modification or a new life cycle. And then there's some discussion about, well, so then I think I responded saying, oh yeah, it's intentionally vague, but maybe not clearly intentionally vague. So then there's some discussion of, should we make it more intentionally vague, or should we have a decision here about, oh, it's definitely going to be a separate life cycle, because we're confident that the life cycle will diverge substantially from the current build pack life cycle.
For what it's worth and what you can see in my comment, I would like to see the latter. Is like there's so many things in cloud native build packs, or what you can do with them, that we would lose if we fixate that too much onto. There is going to be some kind of wrapping thing that then moves, like uses CNBs, but basically to produce droplets and then base them back on a stack that's provided elsewhere. Where I think there is value in more natively supporting them, and we should keep that road as open as possible from my point of view. Just take one example. We currently produce something that is just a little bit bigger than the Paketo tiny stack. So it's like 19 packages from Ubuntu Gemi based on a from scratch base image, and you lose that immediately by going to that. There's again a stack coming from somewhere else, and I think it does get more confusing for users over time. So I would really love to see this already headed in a direction of more native integration. There's another aspect which is like currently evolving in the CNB spec, that is extensions. I have no clue how they would be supported. For example, if you want to bake this into the life cycle where a droplet is produced and then restaged onto that. So I would really like to see this in a way that's guiding already towards the implementation. Will make it at least easy, if not included already. I like the first stage saying wrap the build packs together with everything that's needed, because you can basically give that to every user. It doesn't need any change in the foundation, right? It just works everywhere. But for the next phase, I think we should look a bit more ahead.
Yeah, there's also an argument here that supporting it as natively as possible ought to hopefully ease people's migrations from CF on VMs to Karifi. If there's just less of a change in behaviors between the two.
Yeah. So I think, there's a number of extension points in this RFC, which are probably worth calling out more explicitly. So I think, we just discussed earlier about how there's probably an extension point on figuring out how we want to handle service bindings. So not coming up with an answer in this RFC necessarily, but saying, oh, there'll be a follow-on RFC or some technical discovery around that. I think, like I was mentioning earlier in my working group update, I think there's an extension on the stack question. Like, what do we do about the Paketo stacks? Right now, this proposal is saying we're going on CF Linux FS4, but I don't think that's going to be the long-term solution there. So there's a follow-on RFC for figuring out stack stuff. And then I think there's definitely a follow-on RFC for, I think, well, so taking a pause real fast, I think native can be kind of a somewhat complicated topic when we talk about what it means to natively support the cloud native build packs. And I think there's a whole spectrum on like what true native support can mean. I think from the very minimal interpretation of native could just be basically you upload unmodified Paketo build packs to the platform, and because they're unmodified, we now have native support no matter what's happening below that implementation layer. And then there's all the way down to basically having a full cloud native build pack OCI image producing system behind the
I'm all the way
device.
down that way.
Yeah. So I think I try to be a little careful when talking about native support, because I think people can read into that a whole spectrum of different implementations. But I think if we just take a little slice of that, I think from the infrastructure perspective, there's definitely a follow-on RFC that talks about, okay, well, what does it look like if instead of producing droplets, we're producing OCI images? What if instead of storing those directly in a blob store, what if we're storing them in a registry that may just actually secretly be a blob store behind the scenes? What does that look like? But when we get to that point, that starts to introduce a number of architectural and operator level changes. There's definitely a lot of benefits to operators moving to OCI images. There's a lot of third-party tooling around OCI images, and that's definitely becoming a standard in the industry. But it's also a change from the current operating patterns that they have now. If people have built up tooling around droplet scanning or droplet relocation across different Cloud Foundry foundations or stuff like that, they will have to rethink that. So I think that the move to OCI images is as a storage and deployment medium for applications on Cloud Foundry is a substantial piece of work that I was intentionally trying to separate out into its own RFC rather than this one. And this one's primarily focused on, all right, we have this great set of Paketo build packs, and what would it look like, especially focused on an app developer standpoint, what would it look like to bring those to Cloud Foundry or CF deployment users without making any substantial architectural or operator experience changes to the platform? And then further down the road, as a follow-on from this, we can say, okay, well, right now we're going through all of the cloud native build pack lifecycle stages, except for the part where we take all those layer directories and then convert them into an OCI image. well, what would it look like to take that final step and say, well, now instead of tarring together these layer directories, what if we actually like fancy tar them together into an OCI image, and then like move on to actually storing and running those OCI images. So I think that was the perspective that we were coming from when we were writing this RFC.
What about then to keep this RFC as at phase 1 and make already clear that whatever we learn from phase 1 will make up another RFC for the route forward?
Yeah, I think I'm fine with that. I think we already like don't talk about this in the proposal. We propose that there's a phase 2, but don't really talk about it much. So I'm happy to soften that even more and say like, hey, there's going to be a follow-up RFC in phase 2 talking about defining and coming up with an implementation plan for native support for whatever native means.
Oh, I can make my wording more clear and not use native, but actually say I'm in favor of actually working on OCI images.
Right. Yeah,
it's the thing that build packs produce. It's the thing that like whatever the CNB spec changes, take extensions, right, that allow you to actually add things to the run image. That's your base, and kind of really extend the stack. This all will work as long as you align on OCI images. If you don't, these things might or might not work. So it's like I think I have kind of a more radical state there as well, where I say that I think I've brought that up in the past. I don't even get why we need rebasing. You anyhow need CI/CD, and then just make the OCI artifact something you produce there. You might think about the quick iteration thing. So while I'm developing, but anything shipped for production anyway has to go through CI/CD, which is not part of CF. So it's hard to make this right. There's no concourse or whatever, has never made it into the platform as an offering. But I think for production use cases, you anyhow need it. And there I would really recommend just produce an OCI image with the build packs, because it allows you to basically just integrate with a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
you said the tooling and other things that exist for OCI images.
Yeah, I mean, definitely talking about impact, I think that is potentially one of the biggest changes that would come in on, like, currently basically apps get operating system upgrades with platform upgrades. So because the stack and stem cell both are updated with platform deployments, if we're starting to bake that rootfs, basefs into the application images themselves, then that would represent a change, and like you're saying, would require a rebase operation or something like that.
But that's fully supported. The CNB lifecycle supports rebase of the base image. I just don't get the big point of it. Maybe that's from the perspective of that base image just has 19 packages. So maybe the weight of Java specific vulnerabilities or node specific vulnerabilities actually, like the scale goes in that direction, right? Because that you don't get that without restaging, even on CF. You don't get a new JVM with security fixes anyway. And with like reducing the base layer, this scale from my perspective just goes into the direction that's anyway not supported by rebase.
Mm-hmm.
But there is lifecycle operation rebase is fully supported. So you could have this based on OCI images, and whenever there's a platform update, you just need that needs logic, of course. Like somebody needs to trigger that workflow where that was like kind of automatic by just rolling out Diego cells that have a new system that was automatic, and that needs something. That's true.
Yeah, so it would represent a change in how things are currently working. I'm not saying it's infeasible or that it's a bad idea. It's mostly just that like there is some additional infrastructure work that is needed to make that happen.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting point about the sequencing. Like you could imagine something even potentially triggering a rebase onto an updated stack image in the OCI registry before Diego cells roll. If you have if there's some associated rootfs update, or maybe just do it each time. Like, hey, any new rootfs's, the base images to rebase onto, okay, do it. And then we'll pick those up when things are updated.
Yeah, but either way, not in this RFC.
Yeah, right. Future work for sure.
I don't want to tie too many big initiatives into a single RFC.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get a lot of learning just from the process of rolling out something that's compatible with existing environments with the kind of wrappers or shims.
All right. I know we're starting to get close to time here. So I guess any other thoughts on this thread? Otherwise, I'll press forward.
I'm hoping we can keep it out of this RFC personally as well. Greg, I think it is a bit contentious. Like, I don't agree that we should switch to that. I think it'll be a fun conversation to try to negotiate the right path forward. I see the like CNB spec allowing more non-OCI based implementations over time. So like, and I also see massive operational work in providing a fully self-contained Cloud Foundry that has a functioning, maintainable, operable registry going forward, or a divergence on like things are not self-included anymore. You know, there is CF deployment requires an external registry, you know, like whatever path that we go down, we're in for some serious operational work, I would say.
Oh, for what it's worth, I actually think you could go for pretty close to this is now real OCI images in terms of format, what you pick without even introducing a registry. Like right now, what's there? There's a root file system that Diego actually puts into an empty container, and then it downloads a droplet from a blob store and puts there. Why not just download a tarball that includes the stack, right? You can use the blob store that's already there. I think I can imagine it's a relatively tiny change in Diego, but anyway, just I think there's actually really room for looking for how to do it and where maybe to cut corners and where not. So I think there are multiple possibilities. And for what it's worth, like a registry is basically a blob store with a little stateless app in front, right? So the registry itself isn't that complicated, and you already need a blob store. And there is actually readily available registries that support S3 and all the other huge cloud provider blob store storages. So.
You okay deferring it, Jan?
Like,
are you okay? Yeah, you're happy because like I've also thought about it. It sounds like a lot of fun. I'm just wondering, are you worried about it, or can we defer it as well?
All right. Next item here, talking about build pack customization. I don't know if there's any updates needed to the RFC here, but speaking about future potential, talking some about ways to programmatically configure the build packs outside of modifying the build packs themselves, which is something we could theoretically do once we had support for the build packs. And then another thread here. In fact, this might be the discussion we were just having, or about what does a OCI future look like. So I think we might have already covered this. And then that's the end of open comments.
All right. Well, I've noted down actions that came out of that as we've gone. Maybe if we can resolve that over the next week or so, and then next week we can vote on starting the final comment period on this. Give it, what's the normal one? Is it 2 weeks, a week?
It's normally a week for the final comment period.
Okay, maybe with something like this, we might extend that perhaps, just to give people, because there's a lot to digest in here for people. So maybe give it a bit longer than normal, but we can decide on that next week. So Greg, if you're happy to take these things away, update the RFC, and then we'll trigger a final comment period next week.
Yep, we can cut a new draft with the requested changes.
Perfect. Sounds good to me. Okay. So did anybody identify any PRs that needed TOC attention? No. All right then. Any other business from anybody? No. All right. Well, thank you very much, folks. That was very, very useful and productive. We will wrap up here, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
See you later.
Okay.